Chapter 9. There was an alarm ringing in my head. It was so loud as it aggressively thrashed against my already sore brain. However, it wasn't until I turned towards the source and opened my eyes that I realized it was an alarm clock. An alarm clock I hadn't seen in years. I instantly sat upright in bed and took in my surroundings. I was in the bedroom of my family home, the bedroom I had lived in up until my coming of age. Everything was exactly the same. Was it all a dream? Had I really died? I jumped out of bed and ran towards my mirror. Instantly I could feel the difference when I moved. I was shorter, lighter. My limbs didn't feel as muscled. And I felt strange, like something was missing. I looked at my reflection and realized I was young. Very much so. My cheeks were plumper and my violet eyes rounder. The stress lines I'd accumulated over my years of mistreatment were completely gone. I looked pretty. Had I ever thought that before? I'd been so focused on changing myself to suit Aelric that I hadn't realized it. And that's when I realized what was missing. My wolf. My memory recalled the feeling of companionship you felt after your coming of age. The feeling of something else inside you with their own emotions and needs. This body had never felt that before. In fact, it had never felt much of anything, not even heartache. She hadn't yet fallen prey to the mate bond. But she was me now and I was her. A 24-year-old trapped inside the body of a small girl. I looked to the left to where I used to keep my daily calendar and saw the date. My stomach dropped. I was 14. The goddess had sent me back 10 years. What was so entwined with my future that sending me back so far in time was necessary? Aria! A voice then suddenly yelled from downstairs. Flashes of memories of Sophie came to my mind and I shivered. How many times had she called for me like that? But no, that was impossible. I hadn't met Sophie yet. It took me a few seconds of realization before I finally recognized who it was. How could I have been so stupid? I was 14. There was only one person that could be. I threw my door open and ran down the stairs as quickly as I could, not caring if I tripped on the way. This was more important. I needed to see. I needed to make sure it was real. When I reached the kitchen, I was already a sobbing mess. It had been so long. I had still felt their loss every day they had been gone. Aria? They asked, concerned, taking in my crying mess of a face. Mama! I launched myself into her arms and cried into her chest. She was actually here. This wasn't a dream. I couldn't believe it. This alone had made the whole ordeal with the goddess worth it. If I'd known I was going to be able to see my mother again, I would have agreed sooner. Aria? What's wrong? Are you hurt? I shook my head. No, I wasn't hurt. I couldn't be better. I could tell she was confused and concerned. I just ran downstairs and had thrown myself at her. She turned her head towards one of the attendants, who I only just realized was in the room also, and they looked back at her just as confused. I'd forgotten we'd had attendants back then as well. We were, after all, a prestigious beta household. This isn't like you. Something must be wrong, she said gently and ran her fingers lovingly through my long silver hair. You've never come crying to me like this before, and you're still in your pajamas. Are you sick? I shook my head again. She was right though. I'd always conducted myself in the ways of someone who would be Luna one day, never expressing unpleasant emotions, always being organized and prepared. Yet here I was in my pink PJs, hair a tangled mess and a red snotty face. I'm not sick. I just missed you, I said, sniffling. I was cautious about my choice of words as I wouldn't be able to explain what happened without sounding insane. This way I wasn't necessarily lying either. But you saw me yesterday. I know. But you're so busy with the hospital that I don't get to see you often. She pulled away from the hug just enough to be able to look down at my face properly. I could see her blue eyes clinically inspecting me as if she was looking at one of her patients. I think you should stay home from school today. I'll have one of the nurses from work check in on you at midday to see how you are. No, I said a little too loudly. I cleared my throat and continued more calmly. No, really, I'm fine. I'm sorry to worry you. I stepped back and clasped my hands together, smiling politely at her. This was the usual way I had acted around her, respectful and polite. I couldn't be stuck at home. I needed to start figuring out what I needed to do in order to change the future. I didn't remember much from my high school years, but now I needed to pay close attention. There had to be a reason why I was sent back to this specific time. She sighed, thinking internally for a few seconds before reluctantly nodding her head. Well, you're going to be late if you don't get ready soon. She turned to the attendant again. Lucy, can you please help my daughter get ready for school? Lucy? That name sounded familiar. A young girl with a cute short bob stepped forward and came to lead me upstairs. She couldn't have been much older than I had been when I died. Come along, miss, she said, smiling warmly to me. Her voice suddenly made me remember Lucy. She had been employed with us up until I was around 17, having worked for our family for 6 years at her time of departure. I think she ended up leaving in the end because she found her mate. I followed behind her up the stairs and back to my room, watching quietly as she picked out some clothes for me and laid them out neatly on the bed. This had always been the way back then. I'd never argued with anything that had been chosen for me. I stared at what she had picked out. It was a bright frilly dress to which I cringed inside. Had I always worn such childish clothes at this age? I think I'd rather die again than wear that. I walked straight past Lucy to the wardrobe behind her and began to sift through all my clothes. Much of it was the same, cute girly clothes that would have looked more suited to a 9-year-old. Everyone had always expected me to look cute and pretty as a child. I realized now it was more like they were dressing a doll. I continued to look through the wardrobe until I finally came to my formal wear. Most of it would have been way too fancy to attend school in, but I did manage to find a piece that could pass as smart casual. I pulled out the simple black flare dress and began to get changed. Miss? Lucy asked, confused. I didn't turn back to look at her, and instead continued getting changed. You can throw away most of this, I replied over my shoulder. I think I'm too old to be wearing that sort of thing now, don't you think? Anything that you wouldn't dress an 18-year-old in can be donated or thrown out if it's too old. Lucy looked startled but nodded her head anyway. Once I was dressed and ready, I was greeted outside by the driver who would take me to school. All the ranked members were driven to school as a security measure. The rest of the pack children usually took the bus or walked. I got in the back seat quietly with my backpack and watched out the window silently. For the entire journey, it was a short drive from home to school. Our house was located in a prime location, so we were close to a lot of the important buildings in town. It was strange to see how different everything was compared to 10 years from now. Not just some of the buildings, but the atmosphere. I had felt in my previous life like everything had always been so serious, so life or death in a struggle for power. We had waged so many wars on other territories to get to where we ended up. Deep inside, I had always felt guilty for my contribution to most of those battles. I'd personally strategized the victory for so many of them in an effort to earn Alaric's attention. But here, everything seemed peaceful. They hadn't experienced Alaric's thirst for power yet. As we rounded the street corner, an old building came into view. Graying white stone walls covered in ivory made up most of the heritage building as it stood on a large green field. It had been 7 years since I'd been here. My school's gates were open to welcome me back as if nothing had changed. Chapter 10. It was exactly as I remembered it. But I suppose that was to be expected, since in my memories I last saw this place only 3 years from now. The school consisted of only werewolves, since our territory could afford that. In fact, our whole territory was unknown to the humans, so we had complete secrecy and safety. I walked past the crowds of kids who were all chatting away in their groups, ignoring that I was even there. That's how school had always been. Everyone either hated me or was too scared to talk to me because of the assumption I would be the future Luna. I never minded it though. I was always too busy with study to pay much attention to the whole friendship clique part. I'd walked straight into the main building before I realized I didn't even know where I was going. I couldn't even remember where my locker was, let alone what my classes were for the day. I don't think anyone would find it feasible to remember that sort of thing from 10 years ago. Awkwardly, I pulled out my school diary from my backpack and referred to my daily schedule. For subjects today: history, math, lore, and English. Easy enough. Knowing my past self, I would have already handed in any assignments and homework early, so I didn't need to worry about any surprises there. The first bell suddenly rang for class then, breaking me from my thoughts, and I headed off towards the room my first class would take place. It definitely felt like I was getting more stares than I remembered. Not that I particularly cared about what they thought of me. I couldn't forget the fact. They all abandoned me so easily to cheer on my death, so it's not like I was trying to impress them. But there was definitely something feeling off. I walked straight into the class, walking past the rows of students until I reached an empty seat at the back by the window. There was nothing they could possibly teach me that I didn't already know, and I had too much on my mind to focus on the menial subject. However, this only seemed to warrant more glances from everyone. I guess it would be considered strange if the girl who always sat at the front diligently suddenly sat at the back with the kids who weren't trying. Suddenly a voice broke me from my thoughts. Who died? Someone asked, questioning the remark towards myself. My heart stopped as the question triggered a trauma inside me. I looked up, startled to see Brayden. Except I didn't just see him. I realized that my vision had flickered and I saw the trial grounds, the cold moonlit night. Saw Brayden standing at the podium, condemning me with his bullshit evidence. About Thea. This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real. My mind kept repeating it, like a mantra to snap myself out of it. I blinked and instantly I was back in a classroom seated before a teenage boy. Just a stupid teenager, not a man who had testified in my murder trial, advocating for my death. Only a second had passed, but it had felt like longer. I looked down towards what he was looking at and noticed he was staring at my dress. I breathed out a sigh of relief, realizing he was just being sarcastic about my choice in all-black clothing today. But it was an odd feeling to think he had actually remembered my death for a second there. I'd completely forgotten Brayden and I were even in the same grade, but I especially didn't remember him ever having spoken to me in the past outside of a professional setting. Was this an attempt at bullying me? Was a change in clothes all it took? He was known as the popular boy in school given his rank, but it seemed like an odd choice for him to target me suddenly. My family ranked higher than his, not to mention I was basically considered mated to Ulrich already at this age. However, I couldn't help but feel bitter at him. It was a wave of unspoken anger towards him for an act of injustice he hadn't even committed yet, but I was angry nonetheless. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself, turning to face Brayden head on. Yes, Brayden, I was in mourning, but I see now there was no need, I replied, staring at him dead in the eye. You see, I thought that joke had already died a while ago, but lo and behold, here it is, a miracle from the goddess. There was silence from the entire class as Brayden looked as if I'd just told him he had a third ear. Everyone was shocked, unsure of how to respond. But then someone up the front burst into laughter and the whole class started to join in. The teacher came in after that and quickly had everyone silent and working in no time. I stared out the window for the lesson, barely paying attention as the class went by quickly. Once the bell for the end of the period had rung, I immediately stood up and grabbed my backpack, leaving quickly to avoid further conversation. However, I couldn't help but notice the weary look Brayden gave as I walked by his desk. I found out not long afterwards that I was suddenly the talk of the school as I was standing in the lunch line. Normally there was no need to go to the cafeteria as I usually had a lunch bag prepared for me, but I realized too late I'd left it at home today, forgetting we even needed that sort of thing. I was used to doing business in my office with someone delivering me meals every day. I need to be more careful from now on. There was a lot of smaller details to remember. I stood almost at the front of the queue when I picked up a conversation. Several people back between two girls. Did you see Ariadne today? The first girl asked. No, why? The other replied. Sure, she's a few people ahead, so be careful, don't be so loud. She's wearing all black today though. Doesn't she normally wear those really girly dresses every day? Oh yeah, you're right. You know what's crazy though? This isn't even the first time I've heard people talking about her today. Get this, my friend is in her history class and they said she spoke today. It wasn't even for like question from the teacher. She was talking to Brayden before the class had even started. What? You're kidding. No. And get this, she made a joke. I didn't want to hear anymore as I got to the front of the line, quickly grabbed an apple, not feeling overly hungry, and left directly to the library. I'd never realized I had such a reputation for my behavior. I knew I kept to myself, but that was mostly due to my studies, and it wasn't like anyone had really made an effort to talk to me either. Today definitely felt different, though. It felt like people were noticing me more all of a sudden when I was used to being ignored. Had I changed something in the past already by doing such simple things? I remembered the library well. There was a desk in the back corner that was always free, mostly because I always occupied it every day. I walked directly to the seat and pulled out a notebook and pen, taking several bites of my apple on the way. I had a lot to go over and needed privacy in order to organize my thoughts. So what did I know? I knew that something terrible happens after I die, but that there were no specific details of what that was. The goddess did mention before she left that all werewolves would fall when I did. So what was something strong enough to wipe out an entire species? I shook my head. No, I needed to focus on the things I did know. What causes my death? There were three main things I could think of: Aelric, my Luna position, and of course the biggest one, Thea. The goddess said that she couldn't change my mate because it could have potentially rewritten my entire identity. However, she didn't mention anything about having to accept that relationship or become Luna, just that it was the fate that she had chosen for me. But she told me I could choose my own destiny now. Did that mean I could just reject Aelric and the Luna position? But how would I even begin to explain why I didn't want to be Luna, or why I didn't want to be with my mate? I had 4 years until my coming of age, where it will be publicly revealed that Aelric is my mate, and then it would be another year after that before Alaric's father passes and we ascend to become Alpha and Luna. I needed to find a way to escape that outcome before those events happened. The good news was that at 16 Aelric would be currently on an exchange trip to an ally pack. It was common for the future heirs of ranked positions to spend a year or so learning from allies to become more independent. It was also used as a political tool to strengthen ties with that pack for the future. This meant I had 1 year or so before I would have to come face with Aelric. And to be honest, I didn't think I was emotionally ready to face him anytime soon. The sound of the blade hitting my neck was still echoing inside my brain, never leaving me alone. Right now the biggest threat was Thea. She would be the hardest one to figure out because she managed to hide her true self the entire time I knew her. Also knew basically nothing about her or her background. I was pretty sure I met her for the first time when I was 16 or 17, but given the complexities of her schemes, I was pretty sure she must have had someone watching me without my knowledge earlier. She was 1 year older than me, so it was possible that even right now she had already set her sights on Aelric. So what was my plan to ultimately stop my death? Secretly kill Thea? Run away? Find another pack? All of these options seemed wrong or not possible yet. Killing Thea would be reckless and really risky, and finding another pack would be impossible since I was now a 14-year-old girl with no social connections. Running away was still the best option, but I would definitely not survive alone out there in the wild as a rogue. Not until my coming of age, at least, when I would get my wolf back. However, I knew running would also put my parents in a difficult position, so I needed to be careful. The bell for class chimed and I realized I still needed more time to think about my plans. At least I knew I had 2 things to work on in the meantime, though: sniff out anyone spying on me for Thea and collect as much independent income as possible in case I ended up needing to leave. I figured amassing funds into the family accounts would be easily monitored, so I needed to focus on building my own wealth. Luckily for me, I literally knew the future. Saving up some funds shouldn't be too difficult. But then again, the detail I keep forgetting. I'm only 14. I would need an adult to conduct the business on my behalf until I was older. My mind went to Lucy first, but the thought of trusting another attendant made me feel sick. Thinking of Sophie still made my heart ache. However, it may just be my only chance without drawing suspicion. I decided I would need to test her, make sure this time their loyalty could be relied upon. I refused to make the same mistakes as last time. But all the while, as I was still thinking everything out in the library, I had completely forgotten the bell had rung, and I was now running late. Quickly gathered up my bag and ran out. I ran out into the hall and straight into the shoulder of someone coming from the opposite direction. Chapter 11. I fell to the ground, my backpack sliding across the polished hallway floor. Could feel a shooting cry of pain from my wrist, and I immediately cradled it to my chest. At least it wasn't the worst pain I'd ever felt. "Oh shoot, I'm so sorry," a worried husky voice said. I looked up and saw a boy, maybe 16, staring down at me with a hand outstretched. His eyes were like molten golden orbs, catching me off guard. I'd never seen eyes like that before. They stood out in contrast with his dark brown hair making it hard to miss. I could tell even without my wolf that he was strong. I could see how his body was well built, so I knew he was a good fighter, a future warrior captain. Strength or higher, maybe even a ranked family member. But without my wolf and without him trying to throw authority at me, it would be impossible for me to tell for sure. He stared back at me just as quizzically, and I knew then instantly that he wasn't from around here. Anyone from the pack was used to my silver hair and violet eyes, but the out-of-town wolves were always shocked at first. Both of us were just staring at each other, confused at the other's appearance until the second bell rang. I broke the eye contact first and looked around, trying to find where my backpack had slid to. "Can I help you get up?" he asked awkwardly. I realized then that he was still holding his hand out to me, which I had been rudely ignoring. I clasped my uninjured one with his, allowing him to lift me to my feet. "We should probably go to the school infirmary and get that looked at," he said, nodding towards my wrist. I looked down and saw it was red, but it didn't feel too bad. It would probably heal in a day or so, even without my full wolf abilities. "I think it should be okay," I said. "Thanks anyway." I was about to retrieve my backpack and leave when he spoke again. "Well, it's that, or you're going to have to explain to the teacher why you're so late for class." I bit the inside of my cheek. "I think we should go to the infirmary and get this looked at," I agreed. He smiled and grabbed my backpack before I could take another step or protest. He had an attractive smile that really complimented his face. I felt like his eyes burned more when he did it. "It's the least I can do," he said, seeing my uneasy stare as he threw my bag over his shoulder. "The last thing I need is a rumor going around saying that I beat up juniors." I could feel my cheeks begin to heat up over the embarrassment of being called a junior. Even though I knew that it was technically true, there was something weirdly humiliating in how he called out our age difference. I was internally 24 and older than him. I trailed behind, following him to the infirmary in silence. Luckily we didn't have very far to go and arrived just as we rounded the corner. He politely knocked on the door before opening it wide for us to both enter. "Hello, sweet Amelia," he said, flashing a dazzling smile. The nurse, Miss Williams, looked up and smiled brightly at the boy. Couldn't help but wonder if he was this friendly with all the staff. "Oh, Guy, what are you doing here?" she asked. She seemed almost flustered by his presence as she fixed her hair and clothes. She was on the younger side of staff working at school, probably since she was just a nurse. I would guess she couldn't have been much older than 19 or 20. However, watching her obvious attempts at trying to look good for him, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. She called him Kai, but I didn't recognize the name. This told me he wasn't from a pack I was overly familiar with, at least. He gestured back towards the door where I was standing, waiting a little awkwardly. "This little one bumped into me on the way to class and fell pretty badly. She's hurt her wrist." Her face fell a little when she finally noticed I was there. "Oh, Adia." She cleared her throat. "Okay, sure, let's take a look. Come in and take a seat on the bench." I walked over and sat down where she had instructed. "Well, I'll leave you two lovely ladies be. I'm sure I'll get my ass kicked by Mr. Green if I'm any later to class." He dropped my backpack by the bench and flashed me another smile. Didn't seem as impactful now I knew he handed them out by the dozens. I was also still irritated at being referred to as little one just moments before. "Oh, don't you worry about that grumpy old man," Miss Williams said and handed him a note. "Just give him this and explain. He can deal with me directly if he has any issues." He put a hand over his heart as he walked backwards towards the door. "You are too kind to me, Amelia." She giggled as she watched him leave. It was like an instant switch as soon as he left, her face no longer all smiley and happy. She inspected my wrist and wrapped it up without saying too much more to me before sending me on my way to class. The rest of the school day went surprisingly quickly, and without any further hiccups. The teachers definitely caught on that I wasn't paying as much attention as normal, but they thankfully let me be. I used the class time to prepare a few things in my head in order to implement my first steps. When I arrived home, I went straight upstairs to my room. To my surprise, there were small boxes and bags everywhere. Lucy stood at the wardrobe and looked up as I walked in. "Oh, miss," Lucy said, surprised. "I didn't think you'd be home so quickly. Wanted to surprise you. Come have a look." I walked over to the wardrobe and saw she had been hanging up new clothes. "I hope you like it," All of them were far more mature and to my taste. All sensible colors and up with the latest trends. No longer was everything pink and covered in frills and bows. It made my chest swell to see how much effort she had put into it, far surpassing my initial request for her to just throw away my old clothes. Lucy, I said at a loss for words, thank you for putting the time into doing this. Well, I realized you weren't going to have many clothes left after I'd gone through and bagged up the old ones. I agree that these will look far better on you. She smiled at me, which I reciprocated. I bit my lip and thought, would it be too soon to start my plan? She looked like she really did want to help and was genuine about it. Lucy, can I trust you? Her eyes rounded, surprised by the sudden question. Of course. The young miss can tell me anything. She smiled brightly. I walked over to my desk and began to write a letter. What did you want to tell me? Is it a secret? Is it a boy? She was playfully making guesses, thinking I probably had something trivial to tell her. I sealed the envelope shut and handed it to her. I need you to deliver this. It's really important that tomorrow morning this letter is taken to the abandoned lot on Main Street. There is a large boulder on the property towards the back. It needs to be left next to that rock. Lucy was taken aback at the strange request. She said, unsure how to reply. This is really important, Lucy. It's life or death. I looked at her dead in the eye, so she knew I was serious. I needed her to take me seriously in order for my plan to go ahead seamlessly. Of course, miss, Lucy said, giving me a small smile. I'd be happy to help you with that. Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate it. I sighed, relieved she'd agreed. I have some schoolwork to do now, but thanks again for the clothes and for delivering that for me. Not a problem, Mississippi. I'll leave you to it. She walked to the door and was about to leave. Oh, and Lucy, I called out, stopping her in her tracks. Yes. Whatever you do, don't open it.
I smilte her.
A slightly worried frown knitted on her face, but she nodded nonetheless. Before closing the door, I had gone over the different plans in my head during the day, but all of them had led me back to this one. There was no way around it. It needed to be done. Tomorrow everything would be decided. Tomorrow I was going to kill my Chapter 12. The next day started like normal. I had breakfast in the kitchen with my mother before Lucy helped me get ready for school. Lucy didn't mention the letter and acted as if everything was normal, which I was grateful for. My father was away on business but would be returning today, and I was internally very excited to see him again. I didn't want our relationship to turn out like how it had in my previous life. I knew now that deep down he loved me, even if he didn't show it outwardly. It wouldn't be like how it was before, where I would always try to avoid him out of fear of disappointing him. The school day seemed pretty average too. People were still staring, but most had already forgotten about the day before. I was also thankful that there had been no strange encounters. However, I couldn't help but notice that, in my attempt to be more aware of the people around me, I caught sight of Kai kissing a random girl a grade or two above me. They were giggling and sneaking off into an empty classroom to do goddess knows what. I sighed internally and rolled my eyes. He was one of those guys. I headed to the library, ignoring the scene I'd witnessed, and walked directly to my spot in the back corner. I was making a list of things that would need to be set up, such as new bank accounts, investments, and the like, when a small timid voice piped up. Hi, Ariadne, the voice stuttered. I looked up and saw a girl about my age with mousy brown hair and blue eyes. She was small and held herself with an air of social awkwardness. Hello, I said, unsure as to what she wanted. I didn't immediately recognize her, but she did seem vaguely familiar. It was on the tip of my tongue, though, as if I should have known who she was. I see you in the library every day. I usually sit just further down a bit. But it's okay if you don't know me. I could tell she felt extremely nervous to be talking to me. I just wanted to say I heard you stood up to Brayden yesterday, and I wanted to say thank you. She nervously tugged at the sleeves of her sweater. He's never been very kind to me, but no one in the school has the rank to be able to stand up to him. I know you didn't do it for me, but I just wanted to say thank you anyway. I wasn't surprised to hear Brayden was a bully to the weaker wolves. He always gave off that sort of air about him, but I had luckily never personally had to worry about him in high school. I'd only gotten involved yesterday because he had crossed that line first. Okay, Sorry for bothering you. I'll leave you to your work, she said and went to leave. She realized I hadn't said anything and had taken my silence as a confirmation. I wasn't interested in talking to her. Truthfully though, I was silent in thought over how she reminded me a little of myself in the past. I could feel a similar loneliness inside her that I could relate to. We were also both victims of Braden, but that was something I wouldn't be able to explain to her. Wait, I said to her, and pointed to the book in her hands. What are you reading? She looked down at her book and then smiled fondly. Oh, this? It's my favorite. I'm rereading it for the 4th time. You'd probably think it's just a dumb kid's book though. It's a fantasy novel.
I smiled gently her.
May I take a look? I asked and held out my hand. Sure. She handed me the book excitedly and I examined it. I'd never really read many fiction books in the past, choosing more for academic reads. The idea seemed interesting though. You can borrow it if you like. I looked up at her surprised. Didn't you say you were reading it? No, it's fine. I have so many other books I can read. I thought about it for a minute and felt bad at the idea of turning her down. Okay, I will have a read. Thank you, I trailed off, realizing I didn't even know her name. Myra. I'm Myra, she smiled brightly. Nice to meet you, Myra. I'm Aria, I said, returning her smile softly. Her name was bothering me now too. I still felt like I should have known who she was but couldn't place it. The bell for class rung then and I gently placed the book inside my backpack, along with my notebook. We better be off then, but I'll return it when I can, I said. Oh, no rush. I know you must be pretty busy. It was a little sad, but it was true. I was even busier now than I had been in the past and knew it would be hard for me to find the time to read for leisure. However, I felt like I had done something good regardless after seeing her become more confident from just a small conversation. We said our goodbyes and left for our classes. When I got home that day from school, I was excited to see my father had returned just as my mother had said. Just as I had reacted with her, I ran into his arms and hugged him tightly. I did my best not to become the full crying mess this time as I had done with my mother, but a few tears did escape me. I managed to catch a glimpse of him looking confused at my mother, who mimicked his reaction with a shrug, but nevertheless it felt nice when he finally wrapped an arm around my shoulder to reciprocate the hug. It was a welcome feeling being able to finally do it without cell bars between us. Not long afterwards I was in the kitchen when Lucy walked in. It was just the 2 of us, so I took the opportunity to talk to her privately. Did you deliver that letter this morning, Lucy? I asked. She smiled at me, seeming as if nothing was off. Of course, Mississippi. I appreciated how she didn't ask any questions about it or why I had sent her to an abandoned lot to deliver it. I began to make some tea and started to heat up the water. Oh, are you making some tea? She asked. Yes, I thought it would be nice to surprise Mother and Father with it. I studied her features carefully to see if I could detect anything off about her, but she just smiled at me. When the water was heated, I started to mix in some herbs and allowed them to settle into the water. Oh, is that a new tea? What herbs are those? Just a special blend I picked up. It helps relax the body. She watched as I served it into 2 teacups. Can you please give these to my parents? I asked. She looked down at them confused. Wouldn't you prefer to surprise them with your own hard work? I shook my head. No, that's okay. She smiled and agreed to help, leaving the room with the 2 teacups in hand. I could feel my hands shaking with nerves the entire time she was gone, anxiously waiting to see if my plan would be carried out. Any second now Lucy was either going to return or a warrior was going to burst in here arrest me for murder. I could feel every second passing slowly. Had I made a mistake? Should I have waited a bit longer before executing the plan? But my fear was alleviated slightly when I saw Lucy return to the kitchen, smile on her face still. Did you give it to them? I asked. Yes. They enjoyed it very much. I studied her every movement and facial expression, waiting for any sign that she was lying or was uncomfortable, but when I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, I decided to push the plan a little further. That's wonderful. They should start to feel the herbal effects shortly, I said enthusiastically. Here, I made you a cup as well. Let me know what you think. I gently pushed the teacup towards her and she looked at it. Is there something wrong? I asked, narrowing my eyes at her. She wasn't touching the drink and instead was staring at the teacup a little strangely. My heart sank. Had she only been pretending to not know what I'd just done? Chapter 13. Is there something wrong? I asked, narrowing my eyes at her. She wasn't touching the drink and instead was staring at the teacup a little. Strangely, my heart sank. Had she only been pretending to not know what I'd just done? Her eyes began to water and a timid smile twitched at her lips. No, it's just, this is really nice of you, Mississippi. Thank you for being so considerate, she said softly. I know I'm just an attendant, but you've really made me feel like a part of the family by doing this. I watched as she took a sip and instantly my heart leapt. She'd drunk the tea and hadn't hesitated when asked to serve it to my parents. A bright smile broke out on my face and I ran to her, grabbing her hands in mine excitedly. Thank you, I said sincerely. Miss, she asked confused. What's wrong? Why are you thanking me? Because the letter I gave you yesterday was to say that I would poison my parents' tea tonight, and you happily served it to them and even willingly drank it too. This means you didn't read the letter, I said calmly, explaining. She jolted away from me and frantically turned to the tea she had just drunk, in disbelief. It's okay. Relax. It was just some lemon and green tea leaves.
I'm terrible.
At herbology anyway. Miss, why would you play such a nasty prank on me like that? She asked, furiously raising her voice. I hadn't intended to make her angry, but I suppose I did just admit to trying to poison her. Please lower your voice. It wasn't a prank. I did it to make sure I could trust you, I explained. There is someone after me, Lucy. They're going to kill me. I can't give you all the details and you absolutely cannot tell my parents. If you do, then I won't be able to protect myself. I can't do this without your help. She looked at me wearily like I was insane, unable to find any words to respond. I'm not crazy, Lucy, I said adamantly. If you help me, I'll pay you double your yearly salary for your time and discretion. So please, help me. It took a few moments, but finally, her eyes softened and she nodded her head. In agreement. I think she could feel now that this wasn't a prank but actually a very real threat that I was begging her to help me with. I also luckily had the knowledge of her mate's whereabouts as leverage if I needed it. I planned to tell her not long after my 17th birthday anyway, since she would meet him regardless around that time, but if it came from me then she would see it as a reward. I sighed heavily, a weight lifted off my shoulder as I was finally able to tell someone about my very real problems, or some of them at least in a vague way. I closed my eyes, feeling my body relax. Thank you, I whispered. She came over and engulfed me in a hug. I let her embrace me even though the movement brought back memories of Sophie. However, I needed to push those thoughts out if I was going to survive. I needed to learn to trust and rely on others for once. What do you need me to do? She asked. I didn't waste any time and jumped in immediately to explain the first steps. To begin with, I need a separate bank account set up under an alias in order to amass some funds independently. I also require some investment accounts, but that will come later. Oh, and I need you to find a private investigator for me. The best one you can get, I said, listing everything off. I will have a few more instructions, but if you can help me with these things to start off with, it would really help me so much. Being 14, I, unfortunately, can't do any of these things myself. You'll be acting as my representative for all of my business matters going forward. She seemed a little shocked at all of my requests. I think these were probably the last words she would have expected a 14-year-old to be asking for. I know I look like a child, Lucy, but I really need you to trust me. Can you do that? She looked hesitant but nodded her head. Oh, and one more thing, I said and looked her seriously in the eyes. If someone approaches you and offers something in exchange for betraying, I'll double whatever they're proposing. Her eyes widened a little. How do you plan to make so much money? Don't worry about that yet. I'll be coming into some wealth within the next few weeks that I plan to invest. She nodded her head again before, suddenly, my mother walked into the kitchen, oblivious to the serious conversation that had just taken place. What are you two talking about? She asked with playful curiosity, putting her teacup in the sink. I looked up towards her, breaking the serious air that had been between Lucy and I only moments before. Oh, you know, boys and stuff, I said slyly and turned to smile up at Lucy knowingly. She gave me a reluctant smile back. Ooh, having a girl talk about Aelric, are we? my mother said with a wink. I had to stifle the urge to cringe and instead forced my smile in place to remain composed. Something like that. After that, I quickly excused myself using the need to finish schoolwork as a way to break away from the conversation. I was relieved to be back in my room. In order to be alone with my thoughts. Stage 1 of my plan had gone successfully, but there was still a lot more to organize. The next day I was extremely distracted in my thoughts. I was excited that last night things had gone so well, and was eager to move on to the next part. But unfortunately I had to wait. There was something that needed to happen. First, before I could orchestrate stage 2. On the way to school, I had the driver stop by Main Street where I collected the unopened letter from the abandoned lot. I was pleased to see that the seal still was intact and the driver didn't question the odd detour, which I was thankful for. At school, I found I was just as distracted, but I did see Myra in passing, who gave me a small smile and wave. I returned the sentiment, which made her even more excited. She seemed like a very sweet girl. However, seeing her still nagged at me over where I could possibly know her from. I felt like there was something important I really needed to remember, like some sort of major event. I had to shake it off though. Whatever it was would come back to me eventually, and I had more important things to figure out. The day was going by painfully slow, and I found myself looking out the window. During modern history, I could hear the teacher in the background, but nothing was really registering. Aria? A voice suddenly called from the front of the room. I looked up and saw Mrs. Newman staring at me expectantly. When I only replied with silence, the class all turned their eyes towards me. Sorry, I missed that last part. What was the question? I asked politely. The class quietly snickered at my unpreparedness, which I ignored. I said, what were the 3 main factors that contributed to the loss at Triad River? She repeated. If you had been paying attention to my lessons the last few days, you would know this.
Ist daher irritated.
How naive she was to think I had time to waste on trivial history. Now, she continued, if you'll pay attention, I will explain the 3 main factors that equated to the loss at Triad River. I started cutting her off. Were the landscape, the resources, and the warriors. That's fairly common knowledge, barely worth praising you for, Ariadne. I gritted my teeth. She obviously was trying to make me look like a fool, so instead I decided to continue. The Ruby Night Pack were surrounded by the rogues who were familiar with the territory far better, having lived in that area their whole lives. They cut off their resources and picked them off one by one, using the land as a means to cover themselves. The Ruby Night Pack lost all morale in the soldiers. Surrendered not long after. The rogues became known as the Howling Wind Pack, because they had moved as silently as the air to win the battle. The teacher's face flushed, clearly annoyed that I was fighting back. And their first alpha's name? She asked smartly, thinking she was asking a question I wouldn't be prepared for. Patrick Lux. Incorrect, she snapped triumphantly. It was Wilson James. Moving on. Actually, I said, cutting her off again, if you do your research, Wilson, James was just the leader who helped maneuver the rogues during the battle. He died before the pack was officially established, and therefore, since rogues do not recognize alphas as a legitimate hierarchy, he consequently is not the first alpha. Patrick Lux was the first legally recognized alpha of the Howling Wind Pack. I can understand the confusion though, it's a common misconception.
He smiled calmly here.
Get out, she yelled, her face now fully red in color. Her eyes were flared in anger, and I knew I'd taken it too far. I sighed and collected my books, walking to the door. I'll see you at detention, Miss Chrysalis, she huffed out after me. Here. 4 o'clock sharp. Back in the day, I could have had her sent to the cells just for talking down to me like that. I wasn't a Luna anymore though. I just rolled my eyes and left, thankful that at that moment she couldn't see my face as I passed the threshold. And so, that's how I found myself in detention for the very first time in my 2 lives. Well shit. Chapter 14. Detention was just as boring as I had always imagined it would be. Mrs. Newman kept a close eye on me to make sure I sat in silence doing nothing as she marked reports. I honestly don't know what's gotten into you lately, Aria, she said. You're my best student, why have you been acting out so much? I looked at her and shrugged my shoulder. I wouldn't be able to explain that. I'd literally learned all of this already and was busy trying to stop my death. But I sighed, knowing inside I really had gone too far. I'm sorry I was rude to you, I said sincerely. It was true. I hadn't meant to embarrass her in front of the entire class, but she had challenged me and tried to make me look like a fool. It had set off a wave of anger inside me, a strong new emotion I was still learning to handle. I had been frustrated in the past, but never passionately angry. It was an incredibly selfish and negative emotion I had been trained growing up to avoid. It wasn't until Thea's pregnancy announcement that I'd begun to allow myself to give in. Now, along with the emotional body of a teenager, I was finding it harder than ever to stifle my emotions. She took a deep breath and rubbed her eyes. You're forgiven, she said, sounding exhausted. Just try and pay a little more attention, please. You might not have noticed, but the kids in class look up to you more than you realize. You're a role model. If you start acting thoughtlessly, they will follow suit. I'd never even considered that before. Was it even true? Why would they care what I did? You'll most likely be our Luna one day, she explained, seeing my confused face. You will be a mother to the entire pack and be responsible for them. It's true some may be scared of you or even hate you right now, but they still respect and look up to you regardless. When she put it into perspective like that, I could see how she could be right. If Aelric was here and started skipping classes, I was sure most of the school would start doing it too. I may not want to be a Luna again, but I couldn't deny that as of right now I still held that uncertain influence over them. I nodded, agreeing with what she'd said. You're right. And I'm sorry. I'll do better. She waved it off and went back to her papers. However, she only managed to make a few more strokes before her pen gave out. Ah, shoot, she grumbled. I'll be right back. Stay here and don't move. I watched as she left, leaving the door open. Since she would be gone for a little while to retrieve another pen from the stationery room, I took up the opportunity to make some more notes. I reached my hand down into my bag and felt around until the feeling of a thick hardcover book touched my fingers. It was Myra's book that I'd basically forgotten about. I thought about it for a moment and realized that it would be a better time than any to read it. Even if I didn't get very far, I was sure it would still make her happy to know I'd picked it up. I grabbed it from the bag and rested it on the desk, taking in the worn edges and faded color indicative of the number of times Myra had read it over many years. I traced my fingers along the outside and was about to open it, but then something stopped me. Before I could lift a single page, my vision blurred and suddenly I wasn't in the classroom anymore. I was in a clearing to the north I vaguely recognized. I'd gone running here a few times as my wolf and remembered the small dirt path and nearby lake. Looked around, desperately confused over how I'd gotten there. I was about to walk around to search the area, but a small figure came into view and I stopped to observe. They were walking along the dirt trail into the clearing and started to pick at some of the herbs along the trees. Recognized her immediately. It was Myra. Myra! I called out to her. But she didn't hear me. She continued to collect the herbs, completely oblivious to my presence. Myra! I called again. I tried to walk to her, but it felt like my legs were bound and stuck in one place. She continued to walk towards the lake, and that's when I saw it. 4 wolves appeared from the bushes and surrounded her, snarling. Their faces were full of malice with intent to attack. Myra! I screamed. You need to leave now. But it was no use, she didn't hear me. By the time she did finally look up, it was too late. The larger brown wolf lunged at her and ripped her throat out. So quickly there was no chance of saving her. She bled out instantly. I could hear myself screaming, but none of the wolves paid attention to me. It was as if I wasn't even there. I screamed at them to leave, to beg them to save her, but it wasn't any use. It started to feel like I was drowning, my brain not focusing after witnessing the murder of the poor girl. I needed to leave, to get out. Anything. Everything was becoming black. I scrunched my eyes up and willed my body to regain control. And then suddenly my vision flickered and I was back in the classroom, the book having fallen to the ground. I gasped at the air, frantically trying to consume as much oxygen as possible, which my body had just been so deprived of. What was that? Had they really killed Myra? And then it all clicked. I knew why Myra looked so familiar now. She was the girl who had died in our grade years ago. A neighboring pack called Jade Moon had tried to declare war due to unfair taxes, breaking the alliance previously held. The tax system was a constant thorn in the side of the neighboring territories. Our pack was so large that, as an incentive to not take over their land, the smaller packs would need to pay a fee in protection. The Jade Moon pack had recently had a new alpha takeover and they were young and ambitious. They carelessly tried to start something they would have never have been able to finish. But Myra was the first victim, I remember now. They didn't find her body until the next day, and they held a memorial for her at the school. Her picture was plastered everywhere in remembrance for months. How could I have possibly forgotten that? Was my vision something that had already happened, or was it yet to come? I knew it wasn't a memory because I hadn't been present during the attack in the past. This was something new, something I was being shown for a reason. Think, Arya. What do I remember? I cleared my mind and pushed aside the sickness I felt at seeing Myra's death. In order to think logically, in the vision the sky was darker. Perhaps just past sunset. That gave me only about an hour to get there. I needed to go and try and save her. Even if she was already dead, I still had to try. I stood up quickly and ran out of the room. There was no time to wait for Mrs. Newman to come back. I would need to start the journey and hope I passed by someone on the way there. I sprinted down the hallway going as fast as I could. This would have been so much easier had I been a shifted wolf, but I didn't have time to feel frustrated. I just needed to move as quickly as possible. I continued to run through the school until I turned the corner, hitting something solid. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the impact against the hard polished floor. However, much to my relief, strong arms reached out and grabbed me before I hit the ground. "Whoa, kiddo," said a familiar husky voice. "Where are you running to in such a hurry?" I opened my eyes and saw Kai. He had an amused expression with a cocky smile to match, finding my frazzled appearance hilarious. He gently steadied me on my feet before letting go, but my legs were still shaky with adrenaline. "I need to go," I said frantically between my gasps for air. "I need to leave. Right now. Someone is in danger." "Whoa, calm down and talk to me," he said, now realizing the situation was serious. His attitude changed immediately. "Who's in danger?" I shook my head. "No time. Need to leave now." "Then I'm coming with you," he said. "Lead the way." "No, you should tell one of the teachers. Get them to alert the Alpha and Sind warriors to the north near the lake clearing." He scoffed. "I doubt you going alone is a good idea, not to mention I'm stronger than your teachers here, even without being shifted yet." I hesitated, pausing to consider. He wasn't wrong. I had felt his strength from the first time I'd met him. If he was a ranked member from another pack, then, with the proper training, he would definitely be stronger than the teachers here who were just basic pack members with no combat experience. "What's going on?" a voice abruptly called out behind us. I spun around startled and saw Mrs. Newman returning from the stationery room. "I thought I told you to stay in the room, Arya," she said, irritated. "Not now, Mrs. Newman," I yelled, increasingly getting angrier as every minute wasted went by. "I need you to go and alert the warriors that someone is in danger. They need to tell the Alpha. I saw something yesterday in the north near the lake clearing. We're under attack. I just didn't piece it together until now." She looked at me as if I was making up a story just to get out of detention. She was right that I was making up the story. However, the story was to cover up the fact that I'd had a vision. It had nothing to do with detention. "Nice try, Arya, but back to class," she snapped. I screamed out in frustration and Kai looked at me startled by my outburst. He quickly turned to Mrs. Newman to defuse the situation. "Mrs. Newman. Lucinda, if I may," Kai said charmingly as he took a step towards her. "I just bumped into poor Arya here by chance, who looked like she was running for her life. I don't believe she's making this up, not to mention it would be devastating not to take her seriously if someone's life really was in danger, would it not?" She hesitated, thinking, "I'm sure you can give her detention for a month if she's lying." He bargained. "I stake my rank and reputation on Arya telling the truth, and I will personally accompany her to keep her safe until help arrives." She stared me up and down, examining my disheveled appearance and wild eyes. After a few more seconds she finally nodded and conceded to going to get help. "Lead the way," Kai said to me once Mrs. Newman had left. I didn't waste a single second longer and began to sprint towards the north clearing once more, praying that Myra would be okay until we arrived. Chapter 15. We ran outside and into the parking lot. We had a lot of ground to cover and I Was pleased to see that Kai had no issue keeping up. If anything, it was me, slowing us down. I turned to the side to yell out some more directions of where we were headed. Next, but to my surprise, he suddenly was running in the opposite direction to where we were needing to go. Where are you going? I yelled out after him. It's this way. He spun around to face me as he continued to move backwards. Were you actually planning to run the whole way? He asked, amused. He was right. Even if I could run the whole way, I would be way too exhausted to fight by the time we got there. Fine, I said, running to catch up with him. Hand me the car keys and let us go. Whoa, I am not giving you the keys. He looked at me incredulously. Don't be ridiculous, you don't even know the way. He stopped walking to look down at me seriously. He said. You are literally 14. I'm not giving the keys to a child. I felt my cheeks burn, realizing how stupid I must have sounded. I wasn't supposed to know how to drive a car yet. I didn't get my license for a few more years. And 2. He pointed to a motorcycle parked by the curb. It's not a car. I stared at the two-wheeled death trap. You've got to be joking. He gave me an entertained smirk. You were willing to run into danger. Completely unprepared and alone just 5 minutes ago, but now a motorcycle is too far. I bit my lip. He had a point. I sighed. Fine. Let us just go. It's getting dark and we wasting time. His smirk widened into a genuine smile and I looked away before I get caught up in those feelings he gives off when he does that. I remembered the first time he smiled like that, it had felt like my insides were melting in those molten gold orbs. He had this weird charismatic energy about him. It was no wonder the teachers were so enchanted by him. He straddled the bike and handed me the helmet. Get on, little wolf, he said. Make sure to hold on tight. You're so tiny. You'll fly off with the wind. I pouted at his word choice, which once again made fun of my external age. But nevertheless I got on the bike behind him. I had never been on a bike before and found the movement clumsy. I wasn't sure where to place my hands or legs. You're going to fall off like that, he said over his shoulder. He reached his arms backward to grab behind my knees, pulling me towards him. So my body was up flush against his back. He then grabbed at my hands and wrapped them tightly around his torso. It was an extremely embarrassing position to find myself in, legs apart with a strange boy seated between them. I could feel the heat emanating from his body, and found it difficult to distract myself from the fact I was completely wrapped around him. At that moment I was immensely glad that Kai couldn't see my face behind him because I was sure I'd gone completely bright red. All right, here we go, he said and quickly kicked the bike into ignition. Instantly the rumble of the bike purred under me, growling out as he tested the gas a few times. When he was finally satisfied, he kicked off and we began flying down the road towards the clearing. It was an awkward experience trying to direct him, but I found that, between my yelling over the wind and some very shaky finger pointing, we did finally manage to figure out the way there. I had to admit though, the feeling of flying out in the open without car walls to protect me was exhilarating. The freezing wind was biting aggressively at my body, but it reminded me of being on a roller coaster as a child, terrifying but somehow made you want to laugh at how crazy fun it was. To my relief, we arrived fairly quickly. Thinking back on it now, I knew there would have been no way I would have made it in time by running. If Kai hadn't brought the bike, then it was very likely I would have been too late. We quickly dismounted and I searched the tree line, looking for anything suspicious or out of place. When I couldn't see anything, I relaxed a little. Suspected they were going to approach from the north, but being complacent was a quick death I wanted to avoid. I nodded at Kai and saw he had done the same thing. He would probably be able to sense more than me and would know better about what to look out for. Motioned quietly for him to follow me, and we began our hike through the forest. We traveled up the small dirt path into the trees, being sure to be as quiet as possible to listen out for danger. Kai was far more prepared than I was, as he made sure to cover our tracks as best as possible while we walked. A definite testament to his training. When I caught sight of the clearing, my heart began to race. Took all my self-control not to immediately run to it, but I knew that it would be far too dangerous to go exposing myself completely unprepared. We would be outnumbered 4-2 against fully shifted adult wolves, so surprising them was definitely our best strategy. I pulled Kai down behind a bush just outside the edge of the clearing and sneaked a quick peek through the brush. To my relief, I didn't spot any sign that Myra or the wolves had been there yet. We needed to stay sharp and keep a lookout for her arrival. With any luck, we could pull her out of danger's way before the fighting took place. We just had to distract them long enough for the warriors to show up. Okay, Ivy got it from here, Kai said, still discreetly scoping the area. You should head back to safety. I turned to look back at him, disagreeing with every part of that sentence. No way, I argued. I am not leaving you here to defend against a bunch of wolves alone. He met my eyes as an air of annoyance sparked between us. You only going to get in my way, he said, moving his face closer to speak. In a low, angry whisper. Stop treating me like a child. I know how to fight a little. I can cover your back at least. No, he said. I won't allow it. You're just going to get hurt. There's plenty of time to grow up and become stronger, but you can do that if you dead. Won't allow it? Won't allow it? I repeated in disbelief. Who the hell do you think you are? I am an Alpha's son. I get you from a different pack, but you need to respect me and my decisions here. Leave. Now. Anger swept through me, making my pulse run faster. He'd done it. He'd finally done it. He had tried to use an alpha tone on me. I could feel his attempt at throwing authority wash over me. Since I was just a beta's daughter, I could still feel the weight he had intended his command to have, but he obviously didn't realize that his foreign alpha air authority wasn't going to be nearly enough to get me to submit. I grabbed his shirt and pulled his face so close we were just inches apart. I don't think you realize that I am the future Luna of this fucking pack. You don't get to give me orders. His eyes widened as he jerked out of my grip backwards. I could see his face visibly become paler as it all started to click for him. Wait, what? Don't tell me you Ariadne? His voice was abruptly cut off by the shrilling scream of a young girl only meters away. Oh goddess. Myra. Chapter 16. Panic swept through me. What had I done? I'd been so caught up in a stupid argument that I hadn't even noticed Myra arriving. My emotional reaction was possibly going to cause the death of an innocent girl. Kai and I both immediately jumped to our feet and scanned the area. Straight away we saw the 4 wolves surrounding her, just like they had in my vision. I was relieved to see her alive, but inside I was tormented, reliving the horrific sight I'd seen in the classroom all over again. I knew that at any minute now the brown wolf was going to jump and kill her within seconds. Her blood would pool around her head like a grotesque red halo. I wanted to run, to break down, to give up anything other than having to witness her die again. But I had to keep going. Take down the brown one first, I yelled to Kai, snapping myself out of my fear. He didn't even hesitate as he jumped from the bushes quickly, beelining towards the largest wolf. The 4 wolves looked up, surprised to see that someone was charging at them, but they were too slow to react. Kai tackled the brown wolf to the ground and they began a rolling dance for the upper hand. The other 3 immediately began to circle around the fight, waiting for an opportunity to attack Kai. They snapped and growled at him as they paced, but he was too quick. He evaded them easily and wasn't giving them any openings. I took the opportunity to run to Myra whilst they were distracted. She was on the ground, clearly traumatized by the situation. I could see how her whole body was shaking, trembling to the point I was worried whether I'd be able to get her to walk. This was probably the last thing she had expected when she'd gone into the woods today. Myra, I whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. She looked up as if I just shocked her with electricity and immediately jolted back from my touch. Myra, I said, putting a finger up to my lips. Recognition crossed over her face as I saw her realize who I was. Immediately, tears started to stream down her face as she grabbed at my clothes, pulling me into a hug. No, not here, I whispered, gently pulling away. We need to get to safety first. Myra nodded her head shakily and I began to support her weight as she got to her feet. I could feel her body quivering against mine as a cold sweat formed on her skin. She was going into shock and her body was struggling to walk with each step, but I needed to get her to safety as quickly as possible. I needed to get back to help Kai. He was stalling for time, but I knew there was no way he would be able to handle all 4 by himself. We'd almost made it out of the clearing when suddenly her foot caught on something under her. It was such a surreal moment, something like out of a movie. One of those scenes where something awful is happening and you just see it all unfolding right in front of you in slow motion. I watched as Myra fell to the ground, my body freezing in place with the anticipation of what I knew would happen next. Behind me, the wolves went silent. I quickly grabbed Myra's arm and pulled her to her feet, holding her face in my hand so she'd focus only on me. Myra, run! Whether it was a shot of adrenaline or that she'd finally come to her senses, Myra started sprinting through the woods. I was relieved to see her go, knowing her chances of survival had just increased. Behind me, I could hear the paws of at least one of the wolves coming towards me. They were close. Too close. I knew it was too late to fight back in the situation I was in, and so I dropped myself to the ground quickly, roughly, falling flat against the dirt. A second after my chest had hit the ground, the shadow of a sandy-colored wolf soared over my head as it missed hitting my body by inches. They spun around to face me, their snout curled into a snarl. Seeing them up close now, I realized how very unprepared I was for the situation, but it seemed a little too late by this point to admit that maybe Kai had been right. However, there wasn't much time to assess the situation further as they lunged for me again. Quickly, I rolled away and managed to bring my leg upside, sweeping their face with a sickening crunch on impact. A loud whimper escaped them and they limped off to the side to recover. I took the chance to get back to my feet and ran further into the clearing to create some distance. To my right, I could see Kai still fighting the brown wolf. Neither looked to have gained any advantage over the other yet, but Kai's movements did seem a little slower. He was fighting off the brown wolf, all the while evading the other two. I wasn't sure how much longer he was going to be able to hold out. The sandy wolf growled, bringing my attention back to him. He was angry and I could tell he wanted payback for the cheap kick I'd landed on him. I braced my legs and prepared myself to move. He did exactly as I thought he would and tried to lunge at me again. I was ready this time and managed to dodge smoothly out the way. Unfortunately, he didn't give me any opening to attack as he flipped around instantly to go on the defensive, ready for any move I could try against him. This went on for a while. It became a repetitive battle of the sandy wolf lunging and me dodging. The more I avoided every move with a surprising amount of agility and speed, the more he would become increasingly aggressive. The issue was that neither of us were making any ground in terms of offensive attacks against the other. It became a dance of lunging and spinning in a large circle around the clearing, similar to the situation Kai himself was in. "You need to run," I heard Kai yell out after a few minutes had gone by. "And leave you here to die?" I called back. "Yeah, sure, why not?" Sandy Wolf's jaw came awfully close, taking advantage of the fact I'd been distracted. I could feel his teeth slash through my clothes, almost grazing my skin. I jumped back several feet and created a safe distance between us again. "Do you even realize what will happen if you get killed here?" he yelled. Again. "Not just what will happen to me for letting the beta's daughter get killed, but you could literally start a war because of Aelric." I wanted to scream back that Aelric wouldn't give a crap if I got killed, but it really wasn't the time. "Stop worrying about me and just focus on yourself," called back, irritated. The sandy wolf's attack coming dangerously close once again. I could feel I was running out of stamina fast, but I kept going. At this point, I'd basically given up on any hope of attacking and was just trying my best to not get killed. It felt like my lungs were burning inside as every muscle in my body ached. The wolf's movements were getting tired too, but I knew he could outlast me twice over easily with his full wolf abilities. "Don't be stupid, Arya. You don't want to be treated like a child, and yet you're acting incredibly selfish." "Selfish? I'm trying to help save your life, you idiot. Do you want to make it all 4 wolves on you? Because you're not looking too good, but..." I couldn't finish my sentence as I screamed out from a sudden pain in my shoulder. Fangs were embedded deep into my flesh, pulling me down to the ground. My natural reaction was to turn my head to see the wolf that had grabbed me, but I didn't have time. Sandy Wolf started to jump towards me again from the front, and I instinctively did my best to calmly assess the situation. I watched as he moved, how his limbs worked to drive himself faster, and I watched how he left his head open with no defense whatsoever. He must have been too excited to see me taken down and thought that no defense was necessary. He lunged and went to strike at my neck, but I intercepted him, lifting my lower body up to catch his head between my thighs. His neck was now trapped, unable to move as he thrashed about against my body, Without hesitation, I took advantage of his position and wound my legs around him as much as possible in order to pin him to the ground. It was then that Sandy Wolf looked up at me with wide eyes as he realized the situation he was in. He started to push all his strength into getting loose, but I held on tightly. Behind me, I could feel the second wolf was realizing what was going on and began to bite down harder whilst shaking me in an attempt to force me to let go. I cried out at the pain, tears streaming down my face, but refused to let go. With one swift movement, I mustered all the remaining strength I had left and grabbed Sandy Wolf's face tightly, and then snapped his neck quickly, killing him instantly. The wolf behind me let go of my shoulder immediately, howling out a piercing wail as he saw his pack member killed. Inside, I did feel a little bad for him, but I needed to focus on my own safety. I quickly rolled out of the wolf's attack radius and tried to get up, but my legs weren't responding. Every time I tried to even sit up, they would shake and make me fall back down to the ground. I really had used all the remainder of my strength to defend myself. My body was now useless. And whilst the exhausted limbs were bad enough, the most concerning part was the blood. The bite into my shoulder was deep and was bleeding out slowly. I knew that it would need serious medical attention, but right now I had to slow down as much as possible. With a feeble attempt at trying to stop it, I covered my neck with my hands and applied as much pressure as possible to the wound. I could hear footsteps coming closer and looked up into the eyes of a dark gray wolf, his murderous blue eyes boring into mine. There was no mercy in them, no chance of compassion. This was it. There was no way for me to escape this time. I closed my eyes and awaited his final fatal blow.